In 1325, the Italian city-state of Bologna went to war with the city-state of Modena. The war lasted decades. Thousands of soldiers fought. Hundreds died. And the whole thing started because someone stole a bucket. Not a metaphorical bucket. Not a bucket of gold or a bucket of grain. A wooden bucket. From a municipal well. That bucket is still in Modena today. They put it in a cathedral tower for safekeeping. It has outlasted empires. Today we're looking at the wars history almost doesn't want you to know about. Not because they're too dark, but because they're too embarrassing. Wars that started over a pig, an ear in a jar, a pastry bill, a game of football. These stories sound like jokes, but every single one of them was real. And once you understand why they actually happened, once you look past the bucket, you'll never read a news headline the same way again. It's 1325. Northern Italy. Two neighboring city-states, Bologna and Modena, have been rivals for decades. Trade disputes, political alliances, the usual tensions of medieval power. Then a group of Modenese soldiers raids a Bologna well and steals a wooden bucket. Whether it was a deliberate provocation or a drunken prank, nobody quite agrees. But Bologna demanded it back. Modena refused. And so they went to war. The conflict, known as the War of the Oaken Bucket, pulled in armies from across northern Italy. It culminated in the Battle of Zappolino in November 1325, one of the largest land battles of medieval Italy. Bologna fielded roughly 30,000 men. Modena, only 7,000. Modena won anyway, and they kept the bucket. The Modenese poet Alessandro Tassini later wrote a mock-epic poem about it called La Secchia Rapida, the stolen bucket, essentially mocking Bologna for losing the war they started over a piece of wood. The bucket still hangs in Modena's Ghirlandina Tower. Modena has never given it back. Nobody actually expected them to. The bucket was never the point. Fast forward 4 centuries. Britain and Spain are doing what Britain and Spain spent most of their history doing, arguing about trade, territory, and who has the right to sail where in the Caribbean. By the 1730s, tensions are simmering. British merchants are furious about Spanish Coast Guard ships searching their vessels. The Spanish are equally furious about British smuggling. Then, in 1731, a Spanish Coast Guard captain boards a British merchant vessel and slices off the ear of its captain, a man named Robert Jenkins, as a warning. Jenkins kept the ear, pickled it in a jar, carried it around for 8 years. And in 1738, he brought it to the British Parliament, held it up, demanded justice. Parliament erupted. Public opinion exploded. Prime Minister Robert Walpole, who'd spent years trying to avoid conflict with Spain, suddenly found himself unable to hold back the war vote. In 1739, Britain declared war on Spain. The War of Jenkins Ear lasted 9 years, eventually merging into the larger War of the Austrian Succession. Tens of thousands of soldiers died. Naval battles were fought across the Atlantic and Pacific. Trade routes were disrupted across 2 hemispheres, all officially justified by one man's ear in a glass jar. 1859, the San Juan Islands, a small cluster of islands sitting between what is now the American state of Washington and the Canadian province of British Columbia. Both Britain and the United States claimed them. Both nations had settlers living on them. And for years, they'd maintained an uneasy, unofficial truce. Then on June 15, 1859, an American farmer named Lyman Cutlar shot a pig. The pig had been eating his potatoes for the 3rd time that week. It belonged to the Hudson's Bay Company, which was British. He offered to pay $15 compensation. The British said he owed them $100. He said the pig had been destroying his property. They said he should have fenced his potatoes better. Within weeks, both the British Royal Navy and the United States Army had deployed full military forces to the tiny island. At the peak of the standoff, 461 American soldiers with 14 cannons faced 5 British warships carrying 70 guns. Calmer heads eventually prevailed. General Winfield Scott negotiated a joint occupation. For the next 12 years, British and American soldiers shared the island, reportedly throwing joint parties and playing sports together while their governments argued. The dispute was eventually settled by arbitration in 1872 in America's favor. The pig was the only casualty of the Pig War. This one is the one that always stops people cold. It's July 1969. El Salvador and Honduras are playing a World Cup qualifier match. Relations between the two countries are already tense. There are deep disputes over land, migration, and economic inequality. Hundreds of thousands of Salvadoran migrants are living in Honduras, and the Honduran government has recently passed laws redistributing their land. The qualifier match becomes a flashpoint. Fans riot. Violence spreads outside the stadium. A Salvadoran woman shoots herself after the loss, and her funeral is broadcast on Salvadoran national television, turning her into a national martyr. The Salvadoran government uses the riots as a pretext. On July 14, 1969, 4 days after the final match, El Salvador invades Honduras. The football war, as journalists called it, lasted exactly 100 hours before a ceasefire was brokered by the Organization of American States. But those 100 hours cost between 2,000 and 6,000 lives, depending on the source. Over 100,000 people were displaced, and the economic damage set both countries back by a decade. Journalist Ryszard Kapuscinski, who covered the conflict, later wrote that calling it the football war was misleading, as if the sport caused it. The matches were a trigger. The causes were land, poverty, nationalism, and desperation. Those don't fit as neatly on a front page. France and Mexico, 1838. The French government has a list of grievances against Mexico: unpaid debts, broken agreements, French citizens whose property was damaged during various Mexican revolutions. Among those grievances, a French pastry chef named Remontel, who claimed that Mexican soldiers had looted his bakery near Mexico City in 1828, eating his pastries without paying and causing damage worth 60,000 pesos. France demanded Mexico pay 600,000 pesos in total reparations, a sum that included all French claims, but which Remontel's pastry bill somehow became the symbol of. Mexico refused to pay. In November 1838, France sent a naval fleet to the Gulf of Mexico and bombarded the fortress of San Juan de Ulua, one of the most heavily fortified positions in the Americas. The Mexican Navy was destroyed. The port of Veracruz was blockaded. Mexican General Santa Anna, who had been in retirement, lost his leg to French artillery during the engagement. Mexico eventually paid. France withdrew. Santa Anna had his amputated leg buried with full military honors and used the injury to fuel a political comeback. The conflict is officially known as the Pastry War in the historical record. A war named after pastry. The Gold Coast, 1900. Britain has spent decades trying to absorb the Ashanti Kingdom, one of the wealthiest and most powerful West African states, into its Gold Coast colony. The Ashanti have a sacred object, the Golden Stool. According to Ashanti belief, the stool descended from the sky and contains the soul of the entire Ashanti nation. No one sits on it, not even the king. It is placed beside the king during ceremonies, never beneath him. In March 1900, the British governor of the Gold Coast, Sir Frederick Hodgson, assembled the Ashanti chiefs and delivered a speech. He told them that as the representative of Queen Victoria, he should be given the golden stool to sit upon. There was silence. Then the Ashanti Queen Mother Yaasanawa stood up and said, and this is a documented quote, that if the men of Ashanti would not fight, then the women would. Within weeks, Yaasanawa was leading an army of 5,000 warriors in what became the War of the Golden Stool. British forces were besieged. Reinforcements had to be called from Lagos and other colonies. The uprising was eventually suppressed. Yaasanawa was exiled to the Seychelles. But the British never got the Golden Stool. It was hidden. It survived. Today it is still the most sacred object of the Ashanti people. And Yaasanawa is a national hero of modern Ghana. So here's the question you've probably been thinking for the last 15 minutes. Were they really that stupid? Did they actually go to war over a bucket? No. And yes. Here's the thing these 6 wars have in common. In every single case, the absurd trigger, the bucket, the ear, the pig, the pastry, the stool, was a pretext. A visible, easy-to-communicate reason that covered a much larger, messier, harder-to-explain set of real causes. The War of the Oaken Bucket was actually about trade routes and papal alliances. The War of Jenkins Ear was about Caribbean trade monopolies worth millions. The Pig War was about territorial sovereignty over islands worth controlling. The Football War was about land reform, migration, and economic desperation. The Pastry War was about debt enforcement and European power projecting into the Americas. The War of the Golden Stool was about colonial subjugation and cultural annihilation. The bucket made a better story. The ear was more dramatic than another trade agreement. The pig was funnier than both nations claimed an island. This is a pattern that runs through all of history. Governments don't go to war over buckets. They go to war over power, territory, and economics. But they tell their people it's about the bucket, because the bucket is the thing ordinary people can understand and feel angry about. And this is still happening. It has never stopped happening. The original bucket, the Oaken Bucket from the well in Bologna, is still in Medina. It's behind glass now, in the Ghirlandina Tower, next to a sign explaining the war. Thousands of people walk past it every year. Most of them think it's funny. A bucket. What a reason for a war. But here's what strikes me about it. We remember the bucket. We don't remember the names of most of the soldiers who died at Zappolino. We don't remember the trade disputes or the papal politics. We remember the bucket because the bucket was the story they told. Every time you read a headline about a conflict, every time a dispute between nations is reduced to a single image or a single event, remember the bucket. Ask what's behind it. Ask who benefits from the story being about the bucket. The wars in this video sound ridiculous, but the mechanism that produced them is not ridiculous at all. It is, in fact, still running. Thanks for watching. The full source list is in the description. If this video made you think differently about how conflicts get started, share it with someone who needs to hear it.